welcome to another episode of the Swords and Sports Podcast. One man's journey to read 52 fantasy books in 52 weeks and create 52 podcasts documenting the experience. I am Mike Mogues, the man embarking on this incredible journey. Well, incredible to me at least. And this week, I'm joined by one of the most interesting people alive, author of 43 and climbing books, Christian, aka Miles Cameron, to talk about his book, Cold Iron, which is book one of the Masters and Mages trilogy. So stick around, that interview's coming up right after all the book details. If you're wondering why I keep calling him Christian, aka Miles Cameron, I could just tell you right now, but I want you to listen to the interview where we discuss it, so stick around. Also, I think he shouts it out before, but he has like 4 books coming up this year. I'm not even kidding. It's incredible, his work output. He's got his new release, Hankwood's Sword, out now, and Artificial Space, both of which are killing it in reviews. So go pick those up. First pick up Cold Iron, so it seems like him coming on the show and us talking about the book bumped his sales, and then maybe he'll want to do more with me. And we could be best friends. And we could go in his canoe. And we could do all kinds of stuff. I swear it was crazy the whole time we were doing the interview. You'll see, like, if you're watching on video, which, by the way, you can find this podcast on all your podcast listening platforms, including Spotify, Apple, and Google, whatever they're doing, and Audible. But you can also find it on YouTube under the Swords and Sports channel, where I have all the interview episodes up there from this year. Super exciting to keep doing that. But if you look, he keeps, like, looking away from the camera. And it's not because he's bored. Maybe he was, I don't know. But also he was like refurbishing, whatever the hell he was doing, to a canoe. So he had to keep like watching it to make sure it wasn't like melting or whatever. Just one of the very many interesting hobbies that he has. What a guy. For all details about upcoming episodes, including featured books, author interviews, and more, you can follow me at Swords and Sports on Twitter. And for the greatest clips of all time, specifically from this show, you can follow Swords and Sports on Instagram. Let's get into these book details because I feel like I'm stuttering a lot and it is making me self-conscious. The book is Cold Iron. The author is Christian, aka Miles Cameron. The series is Masters and Mages. It was published. It's got like 9 pub dates on Goodreads. So as we know, very reliable Goodreads. So either it was published January 2018, which I think is very incorrect, August 30th, 2018, which I also think is incorrect, and then October 23rd, 2018, which I believe is the correct pub date. It is 437 pages on the paperback edition, and I fucking flew through them. The publisher is Orbit or Galanx, I think depending on which side of the pond you're on. And the books in the season are... Every season he's releasing a book, so I mean he's got 4 books out this year, I think. 1 for each season, though I think 2 of them came out within a month of each other. Just before I get into books, imagine being so successful that you have published books by traditional publishing houses, and I'm not discrediting self-pub, but there are release schedules when it comes to traditionally published that are a little different and a lot more reliant on the publisher than they are on the person. Imagine having 4 or 5 books in the pipeline. So that's not like a series was bought by the publisher and you finish the first one and you start working on the second one. You're working on simultaneous series, standalones. It's crazy. I'm just like, my mind is so blown by all this. And like, I don't know if I conveyed that in the interview, but like, it's remarkable to me. The books in the series are Cold Iron, Dark Forge, and Bright Steel. As a spoiler warning, I hope your ears heard from that. I'm just kidding. I really hope they didn't. I'm not good at editing the audio, so it is what it is. If they are, then I'm sorry, but I'm going to scream it again. Spoiler warning! This podcast contains massive spoilers for the following book, Cold Iron by Christian, aka Miles Cameron. If you haven't read the book yet, consider this your warning. And if you haven't read the book yet, you're a fucking idiot. Pick up the book, read the book, buy the rest of the series, buy all his 40 books. Make him a millionaire. He might be. Without further ado, Christian, aka Miles Cameron. All right, this week I am joined by an incredible guest, the one and only Christian, aka Miles Cameron, author of 43 different books and his newly released Artifact Space. But this week he's here to talk about Cold Iron, which is book one of the Masters and Mages series. So welcome to the show. Man, what a cover.
Thanks very much for having me, Mike. Always a pleasure. And yeah, it is actually one of my favorite covers. This is the UK cover, significantly different from the US cover. And what I particularly liked about it was that the artist actually captured the kind of costume that Aranther actually would wear, maybe for dress, not every day to work in his leather shop.
Yeah, I've got questions about that leather shop. But first I wanted to ask, you have these two personalities and names. Have you ever thought about like adding a third if you decide to go into like romance or erotica or something?
I've never been sure why I was asked to have a second name. That happened when I wrote my first fantasy novel, Red Knight. And I mean, it's fine. It's really confusing for some readers and fans. And at least in the UK, there are an awful lot of people who only know me as Miles. And my funniest story about this is that not that long ago, like 3-4 years ago, somebody who knows me well in reenacting suggested to me that I should read Miles Cameron because his books were really good. And I'm like, I am Miles Cameron. And my friend was like, oh. What do you I'm like, no, there's no reason why you should know that. Like, anyway, especially in Canada where you never know whether you're getting the US or UK version of a book. So anyway, whatever. Yes, I have those two identities. I actually have a third identity, Mike. I'm half of Gordon Bartram, Gordon Kent, not Gordon Bartram, Gordon Kent. So my dad and I wrote 8 spy novels together, and I'm the Gordon part and he's the Kent part. So I've already got 3, and sure, now that I write, maybe erotica is next. I don't know. I'm getting a little old for that, but could be.
You've conquered so many other milestones. You might as well just dip your toe and just keep creating personalities for every genre you tackle.
Exactly. I think erotica is probably a better idea than literary fiction, because I was joking to a friend on Twitter the other day, like, literary fiction? No, too boring. No sword fights at all.
I mean, there could be a sword fight depending on the erotica.
Leaving that aside, moving on.
Right. What was this person who you did the reenactment? Like, my mind would have been blown if I recommended an author to someone and they happened to be that author.
It was over a campfire, so it wasn't that bad.
Yeah, I guess you could hide in the shadows with that one.
Exactly.
One of the things that, you talk about your reenactment stuff a lot, but I've become obsessed with these writing fighting videos. I think that they are incredible.
I'm glad you like them. You know what? Weirdly, they're a lot of work. They didn't start out as a lot of work. They were very impromptu. But the more I get into it, the more it's like work, right? Not to mention that there is, you must know, a huge HEMA community out there. And I'm not really doing this for the HEMA community. I'm really doing it for other people who write fantasy. But I have to be aware that there's potentially 50,000 Europeans and Americans who might go like, that's not how that theory play works, or whatever. So as a matter of fact, I'm sitting where I usually do my writing fighting, editing, where I edit the videos. So right here handy, I have my big guide to Fiore, which is how I make sure that I did the play right, or at least close enough to write, and other stuff like that. And just as a spoiler, I'm about to go to the 18th century. So there's suddenly going to be a bunch of small sword and flintlocks and pistols and exciting stuff like that. And yeah, that's the next step. I'm taking a week off, then I'm going to do some 18th century stuff. Then I'm going to take another week off. Then I'm going to do some camping stuff, but I'm going to keep going with it.
Yeah, you never stop. With these writing fighting videos, there was one where you were real life slicing fruit with your weapons. How many takes did it take to get a proper cut on the fruit?
So, truth in advertising, there were 6 takes. I got the fruit in all of them. I used the one that looked the coolest.
Of course, as you should.
I have to say that I hate to say this, it's not that hard when you've been doing sword stuff for 40 years. And no joke, I used to play baseball at a pretty decent level. So like, I mean, high
Yeah.
school, but like I can hit a ball. um, Even though I was a pitcher, I can hit a ball, and it's really no different. In fact, cutting thrown stuff with a sword is very like playing tennis. And lots of people play tennis. I had a female friend in the States who used to intentionally, as a show off thing, with a racquetball, she'd hit the ball sideways, like with the
Ooh.
racket held sideways to show how precise her control was. And like, if you can do that, you can cut any fruit that's thrown at you.
I mean, yeah, that seems like easy after that. Have you thought about trying to do that with a sword? That would look cool.
What, trying to hit like a handball or?
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of have. I was thinking of doing it in a video, but I'll tell you what's hardest. And somewhere on the internet, you can find this video, is cutting an arrow out of the air. So,
I see it, but that's the coolest, right? Like that's like the ultimate badass move is slicing an
well,
arrow.
I think the ultimate badass move is somewhere on YouTube. There's a guy cutting a rubber BB in half with a katana. And I think it's real. I don't think it's faked. And I was like, whoa, I don't think I could do that. I mean, anyway, I'm not sure I could see it in the air either. But cutting an arrow is supposedly something that people could do. And I played around with it a bunch. I've done it successfully a couple of times. A master archer, and he really is just an incredible archer. He and I practiced a bit so that we could do it in front of a crowd. And during the practice, he shot me in the jaw, which was
great.
less than, well, these are rubber-headed arrows, right? But still, very noticeable for a couple of days thereafter. But the arrow, if you think about baseball, and I'm going to use baseball as the image, right? You have a strike zone.
Right.
And so really, as a hitter, you only have to train to hit stuff that's in the zone, right? And then, hitters, they have a sweet spot they like to hit at, right? And I certainly did when I was playing. Like, I want a particular pitch and I want it in a particular place. So when I'm trying to cut an arrow out of the air, I confess I'm just like that batter. I kind of want it in the strike zone, and I kind of want it where I like it. And if it's not there, I probably won't even swing at it. And then the most confusing thing is that, of course, if you were actually a Japanese samurai arrow cutting, and they're the only people we know, like from history, that were actually doing this, if you were a Japanese samurai arrow cutting, one would assume you'd be cutting arrows aimed at you, not arrows that were in your strike zone. Right? And that's kind of funny, because it's much easier to cut an arrow in that strike zone, but that arrow is no threat to you at all. And the same part of your brain that has the hand-eye coordination to cut the arrow is the same part of your brain that identifies that arrow as no threat to you, right? Like, that's going past me. Because I don't know if you've played baseball, but if you have, the pitch that's going to hit you in the head. Like, the moment it leaves the pitcher's hand, you're like, threat, 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 threat. Right? Most guys are ducking when they get hit because they knew that one was coming at them. And it's the same with the arrow. Like, you kind of go like, me, and it's probably too much explanation. But
well, I'm thinking, in this case, the strike zone is your face. So,
yeah.
So I don't know where the sweet spot is. Maybe my right cheek. I'd get hit in 1 second. So you've been doing like recently, like the armored battles. Does this guy that you keep beating up, like, is he like, I'm tired of this. This isn't fun anymore?
Well, I think you'll notice, Mike, that in one of those videos, he throws me on my ass. So like, it does even out. Craig is one of my students. He's a really excellent student. And frankly, we are reaching the point where age and experience are going to get balanced by youth and his own experience. And pretty soon he'll just beat up on me all the time. So I'm just getting some while I can. All kidding aside, he's really very good. And one of the things, maybe maybe you don't know about martial arts, is that quite often in martial arts, you want the, martial arts is full of words, master, the maestro, the sensei, to actually play the loser role, not the winner role. Like, and that varies from play to play, but if somebody's going to get thrown, I want it to be me, because I'm good at falling and I'm good at rolling and stuff like that. Anyway, and some of the videos are made with my co-instructor, Aurora. So the smaller knight, that's Aurora Simmons. That's a woman. And she can probably beat me I don't know, 50% of the time, we're very even. I've got a lot of reach on her, but she has a whole lifetime of fighting people bigger than her. So yeah. And by the way, if you look at her armor carefully, if you know the Red Knight books, she is in almost every way the figure of sauce.
That's awesome. What a nice little nod. Um, so this like beggared my hypothetical situation. If for some bizarre reason I was convicted of a crime, and the only way that I would be, allowed to walk free was some medieval trial by combat, and I had to select an author, who should I pick, and why is it you?
Um, yeah, so I'm trying to think, are there any other authors who fight? Sebastian de Castel, if it was a rapier fight, I would choose him over me.
Okay.
And my buddy and maestro Greg Melee, the guy I take lessons from, Greg writes good fantasy, and has also written like a lot of books on swords. So he counts as an author, and he can take me. So you might want him. But if they're not available, you might want me. I've got, let's see, I started when I was 11. I'm 58, so I'm pretty sure that's
This isn't a math
47
podcast, don't worry.
47 years of fencing and various sword things. And I've done kendo and iaido and other, like, sure, take me. What's in it for me though? Like,
I don't know, actually. Publicity? That's like the vague term you throw out when you're not going to pay someone.
and the other thing I have to point out to you is that long before trial by combat ended in Germany, the Pope and all the theologians banned it and said that you're testing God, because whenever you do something like trial by combat, you're challenging God to provide the correct, just outcome, and that challenging God is a form of heresy.
Interesting.
And we all know that most of the time, the bigger, stronger, better trained fighter is going to win. And if he's representing injustice, then everybody stands around going like, well, once again, God fucked this one up. Right? And so that caused theologians to go like, you're challenging God, and we don't challenge God. That's not what we do. Yeah, trial by combat, I don't want to get into a big fight with people who love this stuff, but was not as widely practiced as some people would like to think, and was not acceptable, for instance, in a ton of situations.
Do you think that the church banned it because they just didn't have any good athletes on their side? They just kept
That
losing?
is a fascinating question, Mike, and I'm going to bore you with a real answer. I have a great book upstairs that really changed my mind on that. So about 5 things, 5 threads. See, I'm a history nerd, and
I
I
love
really
where
care
this
about
is
all
going.
this stuff. So first of all, the style of swordsmanship that I practice and that I'm about to test for provost in, and hopefully someday I'll be a maestro, is called Bolognese, right? And it's sort of based on Bologna. So Bologna, for most of the period this went on, was a papal city. And one of the questions that we would all ask in the scholarly part of our martial art is, why Bologna? Like, Venice
Good point.
was a center of printing, and later it had all the books, all the great early Renaissance manuals like Marazzo and Venice. Why not Venice? And then why not Padova, which has an early university? Why didn't they have sword teachers? Or why not Milan, which hired all the great mercenaries? Why weren't they the center of sword schools? So a couple of years ago, I got a book that has apparently nothing to do with swordsmanship on the training of basically priests to be knights in the later Middle Ages. So by 1320, the church had a real problem in Italy. They were trying to reconquer what had been their possessions, and they really didn't trust mercenaries, because mercenaries had a tendency to like grab a town for the Pope and then go like, it's my town.
Sounds like what I would do.
And so they started training young, fit priests, often from the peasant class, like not aristocratically born. And they provided them apparently with complete military educations. And some of them were very successful. Like a Spanish guy, Cardinal Albornoz, was one of the great warriors of the 14th century. We tend to ignore them because they aren't English. So everybody knows who
Of
John
course.
Hockley was. But actually, a lot of the big Italian and Spanish names are just forgotten in the English-speaking world, but they were as good or better. In fact, Albornoz beat Hawkwood. And he was a church guy. Here's my point. It's possible, we do not know this, it is just possible, that the reason Bologna was the center of fencing and sword fighting and wrestling is because there were schools to teach non-warrior class boys to be warriors for the church.
Okay.
And that's why those schools existed. So literally the answer is, to your question, like actually maybe the whole system of fence and wrestling and dagger fighting and all the yucky parts, that was all invented to support the church.
Interesting. So if I have more pasta with bolognese sauce, will I get better at sword fighting?
Absolutely, and every time. More meat will definitely also make you better.
That's a good point. So I was reading something that you were writing, and this guy, Marshall Bulkalut, I'm definitely butchering his name, was practicing climbing in full armor on the underside of a ladder.
Bukiko.
Oh, I wasn't close on that one. Jeez.
That's all right. He's dead, so he won't come after you. But yeah, so one of the great things about Bukiko is he's right in the heart of the period I'm writing books about, and he really did this stuff. And then he wrote his own biography because he bragged a lot.
That's as you should if you're good at
but
something.
He was, in a lot of ways, the Olympic athlete of fighting in armor, and he brags a bunch about the stuff he did, but there's reason to believe he really did it. So yes, climbing the underside of a ladder in armor would be amazing. And my understanding, because my old French isn't that good, from a buddy of mine whose old French is very good, is that he is climbing with no feet, the underside of the back. So that's just his arms. So you got to figure this guy is wearing 80 to 105 pounds of armor. And of course, he has to have a sword suspended from his waist. And he's climbing the underside of a ladder. And there's a real reason why he's climbing the underside of the ladder, by the way, which is that the bastards at the top, when you're in a siege,
are dropping stuff, right?
They're dropping stuff. And if the ladders are built the way medieval siege ladders are usually built, there's actually a lot of rungs, not just the rungs we have on a modern ladder. Imagine twice as many rungs, right? And then imagine the thing is like wide enough for 4 people to climb simultaneously.
Oh
so it's like a wall. And if you climb the underside, it's a lot less chance that the bricks and crap are going to hit you.
So
it's a really useful skill. The only problem is, and I have tried it, when you need to get around to the top of the ladder for the last like 6 feet, your life is going to suck. And I will also say, like, I probably have almost as much upper body strength as I've ever had right now. And single arming in armor is beyond me. I can do it with my feet, but like hand over hand, I can do like 4. It's kind of like doing super chin-ups, right?
Yeah, I'm thinking that's nuts.
And you figure most castle walls are 40 feet. That's like almost a standard. So I want you to imagine you're going to chin up with an extra 100 pounds on you, 40 feet in the air. And if you fuck it up, you die.
Yeah, I'm not going to imagine that because I only imagine myself in a puddle on the ground like I'm dead.
Yeah, me too. And I don't know if you saw this note, but yesterday when I was answering somebody something about writing fighting, like, look, I'm a 58-year-old modest amateur athlete, and I'm pretty good at this stuff, but don't be fooled. The guys who really did, and handful of women who really did this, they'd be way better. And Bukiko is sort of the example. And I don't even pretend I can live up to his example, but I just say to people, like, unless he's lying, and I don't think he would lie because he wrote for the court of France and they all knew him. So if he had actually never done this in public, people would lampoon him, right? I assume people had seen him do this so he could talk about it. And when you think about a guy, figure he's 5'9", that's an average like knightly height. A 5'9" guy in full plate and chain, climbing 40 feet in the air and then doing the gymnastic swing to get to the other side, or running
like a pommel horse
onto the back of his horse with no hands, which he claims he could do every time, right? So you just run up and jump. And I don't know if you know the Olympic gymnastic event called horse.
Yeah, the pommel horse. This is when they swing
pommel horse is actually an original chivalric art. It is mounting in full armor. It's just that we've gotten rid of the armor. But all of that stuff was originally getting one hand on the back of your horse and jumping on.
So that's crazy. So would you say Bukiko was the first guy who was, to use a modern expression, doing it for the gram? Like,
yes. Yeah, good one.
So besides, trying to go on your horse with no hands or climbing under, if you were making like a training montage of the coolest stuff you could do to go to knighthood, what other kind of over the top exercises would you put in there?
Swimming in armor. So
yeah, that seems crazy to me. These people are nuts.
So years ago, I demonstrated that you could, me and a buddy, I always make it sound like, oh, I'm so important. I'm just one of hundreds of people doing this, but I swam in Greek armor, which is bronze and weighs a lot less. Yeah. And it wasn't that hard because of the salinity of seawater. I'm not sure I'd try it in fresh water, but in seawater, it was like, it was just testing. But in plate and chain, I think you're walking on the bottom. But I'd love to see somebody do it. I mean, somewhere there's somebody so fit that they can swim in plate armor, and I'd like to see that. That'd be great.
Yeah, maybe like a Prime Phelps or something could do it.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got the size for it.
Because I knew guys in the Navy who had zero body fat. And when you put them in a pool, they just sank to the bottom.
Oh, of course.
So I assume that those guys already know how to swim with no buoyancy, right?
Oh, so, yeah.
So you put 100 pounds of plate armor on them and they'll still swim. Or we all just learn to walk on the bottom of the pool.
But that's a skill too. Now we're cooking. I really like where this is going. You spent a lot of time in the Adirondacks. Is it possible to climb Mount Marcy in a suit of armor?
Now you're daring me. I'm gonna kind of say no, and then someone's gonna do it, and I'm gonna look foolish.
Well, I was thinking I want to try to do this, but there's
no
good.
Way. I will be impressed, Mike. No lie, but I've never climbed Marcy, but I've climbed other of the 49 peaks.
Right.
And if you know the Adirondacks, you know that it's really like a jungle swamp, like no other jungle swamp in the world, right? Like people imagine mountains and they go like, it's rock. Only in the Adirondacks do you have to climb a swamp. And
yeah.
Like I have a buddy who's climbed all over the world, and he literally says it's the only place in the world where you're climbing and now you have to wade through a swamp to climb again. He's like, how do they have a swamp at the top of a mountain? Well, it's the Adirondacks. I know why, but I won't bore your listeners with why. But those swamps and the sheer difficulty of some of the terrain might be really bad in armor. But I'm going to turn this around for fun. The thing that blew my mind about full armor very early on my family farm, when I got my first suit of armor, I was 17 years old. I was all excited. I was fighting in the SCA. But I had pretty nice plate armor. In fact, the guy who's fighting me in the videos, he's actually wearing my H-17 breastplate.
Oh my God. What a circle of life moment or thing.
Well, it was. But anyway, my point is, so I wore it all the time. I was a super keener. I'd run a mile every morning in my armor, and I was getting ready to
about that too.
Be the world champion of something. And one of the things I learned is that I could go through any amount of brush. And as long as I didn't trip and fall down, because it's hard to see, I was impervious. Like you think of an alder swamp in the Adirondacks, right? And you spend all this time imagine you're in full plate armor. You just walk through. You give no crap at all. You just walk through, and it slaps into your helmet. You don't care. It slaps into your chest, your legs. You briar patch, raspberry cane. You just don't care. And that is actually energy saving. Like at a level, we're used to walking around these.
Right, because it's the rocks obstacles that you've got to like walk on top of as you're climbing these mountains, and you can just stomp right through it.
so in a lot of terrains in armor, you can just go like, don't care, don't care, don't care. But then when you have to climb sheer, so I'm talking about the walking portion, right? And if you know the Adirondacks, 80% of an Adirondack climb is a walk,
Right.
But for that last 15, 20%, you're wearing plate armor. So please call me from the top, take a selfie. I will advertise you to the world.
Maybe I will. You know what? I need some promotion. Get this podcast off the ground. Gotta do something extreme. Uh, yeah, I was thinking like when you're doing the rock scrambles, you're just gonna roll right down. Maybe that might be the end of me. You know what?
Well, I will tell you, and you can actually see this in some of my videos, that when you fall down in armor, if your armor fits properly, you're not taking a lot of damage. I don't know about falling 20 feet, and I'd really rather not test it. But again, if you think about what hurts you when you fall, it's usually something spiky, like a rock.
Yes.
Well, wow, you're in plate armor. Like, so there is concussive damage, like you can get whiplash or even break your neck. But if you know how to fall, anyway, I'm not testing this. I don't want to egg
Don't
somebody
give any
on
of the
to,
listeners ideas. You got some wild ones over here.
I'm not going to put on my suit of plate armor and jump off the roof of my house just to see. And I don't recommend you do either.
You know what? Maybe I would. If I could get some more listeners, let's do it. But so one of the things that like you've mentioned it a few times, but you keep in shape. What's your training routine looking like?
So basically I do 50 push-ups, 50 various other things, squats, stuff. I have a complicated rotation. Let's not get into it. I always do push-ups because everything in fighting and armor is upper body. And I also always do some variation of ankle lifts or hip exercises borrowed from ballet, because ankles and hips are like everything when you fight in armor. You wouldn't think that, but I guarantee you the best thing I ever did for my old age armored fighting was to do ballet, because I just found that ballet, first of all, I've got really long legs and I've always had crappy balance. And ballet started to actually maybe give me a normal human being's balance. And then like the exercises, especially for all that control muscles around your girdle. So everybody talks about core and they're like, oh, core.
Yeah.
And yeah, you got to have a strong core to fight in armor, but you also have to have all the control muscles and tendons that allow you to like move all that extra weight subtly, like to avoid a blow. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So I do that, and then wind matters a lot. So I used to run 3 times a week, and basically, tell me if this is too much information. I have a schedule for people who want to run marathons. So it starts out at 335, 3 miles, 3 miles, 5 miles, and then it runs all the way up to 6, 8, 23, I think.
Over how many weeks?
Over 16 weeks.
Okay.
No, 21 weeks. 21 weeks.
I was gonna say that's aggressive.
I fell in love with this system, and so I ran it. I think I ran the whole system like 3 times, but I only ran it up to 6, 8, 14, because over 14 miles, I don't need to be that fit. Like that's a whole. My dad was a marathoner, and I know what happens, and you're changing your body, and different things are happening. So I will say that running 14 miles is actually one of the coolest and hardest things I've ever done. And
it's incredible.
I mean, a good buddy of mine who was my NCOIC in the military, he was a Marine. He ran the big distances, the triple marathons, and the
ultras. Yeah, those people are crazy.
Yeah, all those things. And he taught me a lot about fitness, quite honestly. Like I was 38 and I thought I was fit, and he kind of went like, "Sir, you're not fit. This is fitness over here." And that was super good. Like I probably wouldn't still be fighting if he hadn't sort of pushed me out the door. And he's like, "We're a counterterrorism unit, sir. You need to be as fit as I am." I was never going to be as fit as him. But anyway, we're still friends, and he still runs and bikes. Like, oh yeah, 60-mile bike ride. Sure, he's off to the races, and he's older than me, right? Okay, so that keeps me humble. But nowadays, I've just started to substitute some distance bike riding for some of the runs. So like last week, I did a 25K, a 35K, and a 6 mile run. And frankly, I don't mean to disappoint your readers, but like, it's not about macho. I'm getting older and I have to take care of the joints, not just exercise the
I was
muscle.
gonna say it's got to be a lot easier on the joints.
Yeah.
This is coming from like, who says we don't talk about sports on this podcast, everybody? But this is coming from someone who's like run a couple marathons, so like, yeah, I'm fascinated by this stuff. But yeah, the
Yeah.
biking is so much easier on the joints.
Well, and I'm afraid it's a thing. Like it's funny in a couple of these interviews, and I'm not accusing you, but people want me to be super macho. Fighting in your 50s is not about being macho. It's about energy conservation and taking care of yourself. And also, frankly, only fighting people you trust. I don't want to have an arm broken. I've had fingers broken and stuff like that. I mostly fight people I really like. There's a great tournament in Italy called the Torneo di Cigno Bianco, the Tournament of the White Swan. Some of the best fighters in the world go to fight there. And I've never had a bad experience there. I love doing that. But there are people in the world who will say up front, like, I'll late hit you to break your fingers because then maybe my buddy will do better in the next round. And I'm like, yeah, that's for young people. I mean,
that's like the Karate Kid.
Yeah, well, there's different flavors of martial arts, right? Mike, there's different people take martial arts at different levels of seriousness. And a guy who I've taken a bunch of lessons from in Armazzare once said, and I quote it to my students all the time, unless your life goes in a very weird way, you will never fight anyone to the death in a back alley with an Italian longsword. So you never need to bring that, like, I'm part of the killer elite BS to a fight with Italian longsword. This is about discovering history, not about like male domination.
Yeah, and I think that anybody who wants you to be macho doesn't really have an understanding of martial arts as it is, because that is the exact opposite attitude to have when embarking upon it.
I think so, but not everybody seems to feel that way. But anyway, like I'm not trying to be all knowing. I'm just saying, like, at my age, when I do this, I have to be cautious. I can't be that bold.
Of course. But also, you do happen to know a shitload. My last question along this line of conversation is, how fast can you run a mile in a suit of armor? Like, is there an average? I imagine that someone has like a world record or something.
Yeah, but so bunch of things. So
factor,
first
course,
of all,
the armor.
Everyone would have to be carrying about the same weight, right?
Of course.
And no two suits of armor are the same. So that would be super hard. Last year, now I'm going to guess because I can't remember, but last year, as part of our deed of alms, where we raised money for a local homeless shelter, Craig, the guy I'm fighting in the videos, Craig and I ran a mile, and he didn't have leg harnesses. He doesn't own leg armor yet. And he's a lot younger than me. And I will completely admit that I thought I was going to die in the last 250 yards. No, it was really like I had a new helmet and it weighed more. And it was hilarious because we launched from my church. I'm an Anglican. I go to church. I know that shocks everyone because I seem so normal. And we launched from my church, and for the first half mile, I was like, I'm cruising this.
Yeah, this
and
is
we're
great.
We're at a good rate. And then, you know, that feeling, you would know it as a marathoner when your muscles go like,
yep,
here we go.
The wall.
Right.
And you're like,
except I'd only gone a half mile. I mean, I was totally emotionally unprepared because when I'm running distance, I know when it's coming, but in the armor, I thought I was fine. And then all of it was like a morale crash. Right. And I'm like, what's happening? And Craig's looking at me and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to gut this out. Anyway,
of course.
So that was weird. I'll know better this year, but I think we ran it in 11 minutes.
That's
11 minutes and some seconds.
Holy shit. With what?
Yeah,
like
well,
60 pounds
I
of
think
weight
that's
on?
part of the problem is that, out of the starting gate, hey, we all do this. I was overconfident.
Of course.
Right? And I just ran too fast. And if I had to do it again, I would not start that fast.
So was you guys in that video for that? I
Yeah.
was looking at that. You guys looked like you had a good stride going. Like it was impressive.
Yeah, it was too impressive. I should have shortened it. Like, no, seriously, I can remember doing it years ago, exactly the same thing with no armor on in a Navy out time for like, I can't remember, OCS or something. And I like ran with the big dogs for the first mile of a 1.5 mile run. And I'm like, I can keep this up. And then all of a sudden my body said, no, you smoke cigarettes. You can't keep this up.
Yeah, that's not the best performance enhancer.
No.
There's a New York City race that's like the mile down Fifth Avenue race,
Yeah.
and I've done it twice, and both times I've tried to keep up with my age group, like the guys who go in the front. The less clothes you wear in running, the faster you are. So like those guys, in the singlets and stuff like that. And that's that exact feeling. A quarter mile, I'm like, I'm good. I'm like a world record holder. And then by the half mile, I'm like throwing up on the side of Fifth Avenue. I'm like, yeah, this
Yeah.
is why you gotta run. You gotta run your race.
Yeah, that is exactly it. You're again, a few years ago, almost 10 years ago, when we did the first reenactment of the Battle of Marathon, we all told each other we were going to do a oplitodromos. So that's the run in armor of ancient Greece. And it was an Olympic event, by the way. And I'd like to see it be an Olympic event again. So we had real simple rules. You had to wear greaves. So
Okay.
that's the lower leg armor. Wait, you can't see that I'm showing you my leg, but
yeah, I was wondering.
And that turned out to be a huge problem because a lot of people's greaves didn't fit well enough, and so it just slammed into your instep every step. But long story short, in the end, it was just me and Craig Sitch from Australia running our hearts out, and he won by a stride, which is okay with me because he's 20 years younger than me. But we set a nice clip, and that was because my dad coached me on how to run it, and he had me run basically like 1.5 oplitodromi so that I was ready to run one fast. And that was good. That was a good training. My dad knew all about running, and it's funny because he got me started in fencing, but he wasn't that into it. And so it was really fun that much later in life, I came back and I'm like, Dad, I'm going to run this race in Greece. And he's suddenly like, oh, now we will have.
Now we're cooking, right? Nothing to run.
Finally, you're doing something I care about. Yeah. and then I showed him that I had to carry like a 12-pound shield and wear a helmet. And he's like, oh, this isn't going to be good for running.
That's not conducive to a fast marathon time.
No.
That's so funny. I just want to point out that you could say you didn't care that much about losing the event, but you did mention the exact amount of distance that the guy beat you.
I won't lie. I really like to win. And while Craig and I are old friends and I love the guy, I would have rather won.
Of course. That's just the mark of like, what it's like. I don't care that I lost. It was only by a point though.
Word. Yeah.
All right. I think that this is probably the most sports we've ever talked about on this podcast, but I do have some questions about Cold Iron. This is a spoilers podcast, but these are some pretty dumb questions. So are you ready to get into it?
Bring it.
Is there anyone that Aranther is not willing to have room with him?
That's a great question. No, because Aranther is actually a nice guy and he wants to be friends with the world. And when he basically brings in his local heroin addict to be his roommate, he's I'm not being completely fair, but you know what I mean. And see, I know people like that. I can't claim I'm Aranther, but I know people like that. The farm boy who will give you the shirt off his back. They exist.
But when he brought in Assassin, I was like, oh my God, we're just letting anybody stay over now. I love this. Yeah.
Well, also, there's a thing where when all your roommates are violently killed, maybe you just want somebody in the room,
Yeah, I loved his commitment. You've lived in New York, so I'm sure you're familiar. He's like he's running the Amityville Horror House over there. He's just letting anybody get, he's running a big frat house. And I've got a bunch of questions about it. Should Draco quit comedy after he makes the joke, isn't Leather already dead?
I had a good time writing T. Draco. And in a lot of ways, T. Draco is me, and that's my sense of humor. So maybe I should quit. Maybe I should quit comedy, but I thought it was funny, and that's what I always say. That's what I always say to my daughter, because she's like, "Dad, you're not funny," and I'm like, I thought it was funny.
I also thought it was funny. It's just like when you write a joke like that, it's just like it comes across so funny to me. But what do you think was a better joke? Do you think that joke, or do you think that someone mentioned this was a joke? I don't think it does. When was Zennis murdering the kid? Oh no, sorry. What was a better joke? This or when Kalinkos was killed, they mentioned that someone thought it'd be a joke to have the butler kill himself as well. And that was supposed to be someone's humor.
No, Leather Dead is a better joke.
I agree. Who is Aranther addicted to murdering people?
No, but and this is something I think about a lot. I'm going to give you serious answers to your questions. I hope you don't mind.
I love it.
I think a lot about like what it's like to live a life of violence for real, right? And I'm lucky that I've known a couple of people. One, I won't even call him a Vietnam vet. One Vietnam War hero with a lot of decorations, and a bunch of Navy SEALs and various other people I've known who have, to some extent, lived that life. But to be honest, the kinds of people who fought regularly in, say, the Middle Ages or the Renaissance probably fought a lot more often than our modern super soldiers. And so that sort of begs the question, like, what kind of person ends up in that life, and how does it develop? And then, in a way, that's what Cold Iron is about. How does this farm boy end up as Luke Skywalker? Like in Star Wars, it's because his dad is Anakin Skywalker and whatever. Well, in Cold Iron, that's not what it's about. It's about as the other book title goes, a series of unfortunate events. like in the wrong place at the wrong time a couple of times, and look, suddenly you're in a life of violence. And then how do you react to it? And I think that martial arts skill is a form of power, and power corrupts or enhances. Like, I think a lot of the morality that, now I'm about to say a thing that's so totally serious and you can edit it out, but a lot of the morality that we don't care that much about anymore in the world was to keep people from flipping out in situations we hopefully don't have to encounter anymore. Like being in a series of battles all summer long where you end up killing a bunch of people. And when you confront that, you go like, well, who am I now? Like, am I a bad person? Was that okay? Is it okay just because my country told me it was okay? And these are things that, like, thank God, fewer and fewer of us have to confront. But once upon a time, that was commoner. So I tried to give Aranther, he's not your typical fantasy character. He has great parents. I mean, he believes different things from his parents, but they're clearly solid. He comes from a solid family. And I tried to give him a solid psyche so that when the horror started, he'd be going like, yeah, but I know who I am, and I know that I don't cut their throats when they're down. And you get what I'm saying? Like, I was trying to approach how you don't get broken by these experiences. And even as it is, I know we're talking about Cold Iron, but a lot of the second book is about his confronting how it's really all murder. Like, once you have a magic sword and nobody can face you, and you just win, right? Well, now it's just murder, right? Like, it's kind of like being a drone controller. You're sitting in Idaho,
right? And you're just like responsible for it, but you're kind of detached in a way. And like, can you come to terms with that?
Yeah. So anyway, I if I say I had a good time with that, I kind of want fantasy readers to think about all that stuff, because I noticed you have on your wall the Stark and Lannister banners, and it's easy in various fantasy settings to just take for granted, like, yeah, and people kill people and there's violence. But because I'm a medievalist, I'm going to say, like, actually the Middle Ages weren't that violent, and when they were, the early nation states are struggling to keep the violence focused. Like, you can make war in France if you're English, but don't bring that crap back here to England, because we will outlaw you and we will hang you. And so we tend to think of, how can I put this? We tend to think of the past as a place where there was, no rules. But in fact, there were rules. And so a lot of the rules that you run into in Cold Iron, those are real medieval rules. Like you couldn't wear a sword in most English cities. Didn't matter who you were. I mean, I guess the king could, but just because you were a knight didn't mean you could wear your weapons. You needed a license. And if you didn't have a license, you like left your sword at the gate. Same in Italy, there were laws. And that's because it wasn't just violence everywhere. And when it was violence, they had this code to keep you from flipping out about your violence, which is chivalry. Because once you start killing people, where do you stop? And nobody wants you to just go around killing people. So they're going like, well, there's going to be rules. Sometimes you're going to capture people.
And sometimes also the only way to kind of handle things that are really outside of what a normal experience is to kind of put these codes and restrictions in it. So you could be like, well, I'm fitting this as much as I possibly can.
Yep. Yeah. And, you know, a lot of people think post-traumatic stress disorder is modern, but there's all kinds of signs that Roman legionaries and medieval knights experienced what we now call PTSD, the form of attachment disorder. And one of the things that, for instance, Byzantine soldiers, after they'd been off fighting the Turks, they would have to go through 8 weeks of penance because killing in war was murder to the Greek Orthodox Church. And so they do 8 weeks of penance. Well, that sounds weird and whacked, but almost any PTSD sufferer or coach would say, well, 8 weeks with your military unit to talk out what happened, you know, sort of come to a conclusion about it, maybe guided by a priest, actually maybe not the dumbest idea in the world.
Yeah, God forbid we do 8 weeks of group therapy. How could, like, you know, that sounds like a great idea.
It does sound like a great idea. And yet when I was 17 and I first read that, I kind of went like, well, that sounds dumb. Why didn't they praise them as heroes? But yeah, but lots of veterans don't want to be praised as heroes. They just want to figure out what just happened.
Understandable. And I imagine that that is quite hard to come to terms with. I guess that kind of leads into one of the more serious questions I ask on this podcast. You know, what about your books kind of breaks that traditional mold of fantasy? You know, like the killing without consequences, the machoist man saves the helpless woman from the dragon. You know, that's kind of read by the neck beard in their mom's basement and doesn't have a real grip on the world. What about your books?
Careful
kind of
there,
breaks?
Mike. That was me. I was that neck beard.
It was also kind of me as well.
It was my grandmother's basement. But anyway, so I'm going to say, first of all, that in Cold Iron, I literally set out to break as many of those as I could and still get people to read the book. So one of my favorite bits that no commentator has ever mentioned, so I feel like it gets ignored.
Now's the time.
For 2/3 of that book, Aranther is the sidekick. Dahlia is the hero. Dahlia is like the better sword person, the trained professional, the spy, the one who knows how it all works. And Aranther is literally like her sidekick, right? And she's sort of dragging him along on the adventure. And I thought that was fun for a bunch of reasons. One, because she's a woman and he's a man. Two, because he's second fiddle for the longest time. And I don't know, like that, nobody's ever said like, oh, wow, making the protagonist the sidekick. I mean, it's been done. Making and then the other thing is, of course, they have a love affair and then it doesn't work. And then they remain friends.
Refreshing.
Yeah, welcome to the world. Like you're the first woman you meet who's a good sword person turns out may not be the woman you marry. And then also, hey, you can remain friends with people you've slept with even when it didn't work out. Surprised.
Crazy idea.
I know, really crazy, but yeah, I wanted to play on all those automatic tropes, right? And go like, no, it could go a really different way. And also, I mean, the major trope, it's not fantasy England or fantasy Germany or fantasy France. It's fantasy Ottoman Turkey.
Right.
And that people did like. I got a lot of very favorable, like, oh, finally, it's not all white people doing, you know.
Yeah, which we're tired of.
Yeah, well, which I mean, you and I are two white guys talking to each other, but
of course.
Like,
great.
And by the way, I in no way mean to slight, for instance, John Gwynne, whose stuff I love and who writes like straight up Viking. Yeah, I like all that. It's just that it doesn't have to be the only thing. and I really enjoyed doing I mean, I call it late Byzantium because it's a fantasy world, so the Byzantine Empire never really fell. But then it's not Christian, so and then lots of people wear turbans, and clearly there is like a lot of Ottoman influences. I just called it Near Eastern fantasy. It's like, yeah, sort of Ottoman fantasy, and that was fun. It's also a world I know pretty well, and I had just read a whole bunch of books for a wargaming campaign on the Greek Revolution of the 1820s when Greece sort of separated from the Ottomans, and I'd read both the Greek side and sort of the Ottoman side, and went like, wow, this is a really good background I'll never write a historical novel here. This is a really good background for a fantasy novel.
I think that you smacked that answer like cutting through a fruit with a sword. Just killed it. One of the things that, and I appreciate that. I think that's a really insightful look into it. One of the things that this book does extremely well, and I am in love with, is made up swear words in fantasy books. Like, you see this in a whole bunch of different things, and you've got a list that rivals no other. Just like an extensive creative list of kind of alternative curse words that exist only in this world. And I'd like to read out, I mean, besides the 8,000 versions of the sun, I'd like to read out some of the better ones. Is that all right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Apollone's dick, which is just funny. Anytime you throw a god and a private part in one thing, this is the #1 podcast that talks about dick jokes in fantasy books. So you nailed that one. Fucking darkness. That's just clever. Lady Sophia, help us. We've got Kirkos' swelling member, by the sword of Anulios. And then you almost didn't repeat a sun swear word until about 2/3 through the book, which was super impressive. Just to read off some sun ones: glorious sun in the heavens, sunrise, holy sun rising in the east, summer sun, bright sun, by the sun, blessed sun, sun rising, sunlight, holy sunrise. I like beast root. And then what goes into creating just a good made up swear?
Well, I mean, first of all, just think of how we swear in English, right? So we've got our nice old Anglo-Saxon words for like sexual intercourse and various sex acts that we either pretend to enjoy or pretend not to enjoy, depending on our gender and bias. And then defecation, always super popular. But I'll tell you, one of the things I've noticed across my life is that Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, atheist, everybody likes to say Jesus fucking Christ. Like, it's really powerful. Jesus fucking Christ. When people are angry or totally motivated. And I've always liked playing with God-based swear words in almost everything I write. I mean, in Red Knight, I just used Christianity because I was writing about knights, and knights and Christianity kind of go together. But honestly, when I sat down to make up a new world, I admit I made the map first, but the swear words came very soon after. Like, I wrote 30 pages on the religion, and while I was writing the religion, I was writing the curse words, because there's a pantheon, because they're pantheists, they're not monotheists, and the pantheon is loosely based on the Greco-Roman kind of, but anyway, won't bore you with it. But I will say that I'm pretty sure that in the ancient world, people swore by various body parts. Aphrodite's big boobs and Poseidon's swelling member and whatever. I'm guessing that because if you go to a place like Epidavros in Greece, there's like some body parts that are sort of physically represented, if you will. And you go, oh, I wonder if these are representations of the godhood in a simple symbol, right? But yeah, people swear, and people like to swear, and it's super important to get that feeling right. And it's funny that you should say this, and I'm flattered, by the way, because it's not something a lot of people have noticed, because I think it gives fluency to the book. Whereas when I just published Artifact Space, and I love Artifact Space, but I just used modern swear words, and I found them dull by comparison with like the richness of made up swear words or something. I think I know what I'm saying here. But it wasn't as exciting. It just wasn't. Like Marca and Barrow, all she ever says is almighty, because she's kind of, it's 400 years in the future, and basically almost all organized religions have sort of welded into one vague, it's like Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, and like there's almighty. And so that's all she ever says. And I'm sorry, but it's boring by comparison with.
I agree. I would be remiss to the fans here if I didn't mention an excellent dick joke in the book. You say, maybe then I'll fuck your corpse. I suppose that passes for a witty exchange in the North, Dahlia said. After I kill you, I will not make any attempts on your corpse. Although I suspect your member will work as well or ill after death as before. That's just classic.
I had a great time with that. But I'll also say, I don't know how many of your viewers are both into sports and play Dungeons and Dragons.
But I had the crossover was less than I anticipated when I came up with the idea.
I had a fabulous experience way back in university. The Wargaming Club, which was like the D&D club, was co-located with the Drama Club and the Gay and Lesbian Association. We all shared an office, and we called ourselves the Pariah Alliance, right? Because we were like nerds and gays. That's the nerds, dramies, and gays. Fine. So, long story short, I ran a role-playing campaign and had all three organizations in the role-playing campaign. And there was this one guy and this one girl, and I wish I knew their names. They only played the one time. They were fantastically funny. And they could just fire off the like challenging smack talk.
Like the bar, yeah.
Like nobody I'd ever played role-playing games with. And I wasn't ready for them. And so I had a big bad guy, and they just fucked him over with their witty repartee so that I couldn't make him into the big bad guy, because like I couldn't come up with stuff.
You just kept getting clowned. It's hard to look intimidating as you're getting insulted to your face.
So Dahlia's lines there are almost totally stolen from a nameless guy in university whose smack talk just ruled. He was just the champion. And I wish he'd come back and played more often, because man, he
what an impact this guy made, right? Well, years later, he gets a line in a book.
Exactly.
All right, I got two more dumb ones for you, and then I think I've bothered you enough. Is it more alarming that the Academy has been infiltrated by the pure or by vegans?
Oh, you caught that, did you? No, it's more alarming that it's the pure. It's funny. You first of all, I'm going to compliment you, so watch out. Like your supposedly dumb questions are actually way more entertaining than a lot of the questions I've asked in the last 35 interviews. And I particularly like this one. So I'm just going to say, also part of world building is building diet. And when I put together the diet for Cold Iron, I was like, they're not going to be English. They're not going to eat beef all the time. They're not going to have stew. So I was sort of thinking about living in downtown Toronto and what we eat and what they ate in medieval Venice and what they ate in medieval Constantinople. And I'm like, so they're going to eat a lot of fish. Right. And then I thought like, because I'm introducing elements of what we would now call Indian religion. I mean, I've fantasized it, but what we would call a more Hindu kind of religion in Cold Iron, maybe some of them are vegetarians. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that would go with, I don't know if you know this, but there was a whole stream of vegetarianism in ancient Greece. They were like in the Western world, right? Just roll with me on this. And I'm like, okay, that tracks. So there will be people who are vegetarians. Now, I am not a vegetarian. I'm more of a meat.
You're pretty vocal about that. I'm just.
Yeah. But I totally appreciate it. Sorry, there's no diss intended unless you're my friend and you're a vegetarian. And then I get to
then of course. I mean, what else is it for?
But not to strangers. I have enormous respect for anyone who can get through 2 weeks without eating bacon. It mystifies me, but I am deeply respectful. So I may have made some in-book cracks, but it's really the pure who are the threat. And it's a great question.
All right. I don't think this one's going to be. Would Abraham Lincoln have been the perfect light bringer since he never told a lie?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And when I sold Cold Iron, um, I don't know how many writers you know, but like you write an outline, you write some character arcs, you describe 5 characters. I think I described Aranther, Draco, Dahlia. Maybe that's all I described. Can't remember exactly who made the cut. And then you kind of need a shout line that you put at the top in italics, because frankly, in marketing, I think that's all they ever read.
It's the one line. It's the only thing.
Yeah, it's one line. So my one line was Galadriel. Wait a minute. Let me see if I get this. I want to get this right. Gandalf, Galadriel, Mahatma Gandhi, and D'Artagnan take on Sauron for all the marbles, right? And like the point I was getting to is the Lightbringers aren't all like Jedi Knights, and they're not all powerful warriors. They're just mostly good. And one of the things that I really enjoyed kind of getting across is they're good, but they're quite manipulative about being good, right? And that makes them not at all like. So I'm going to wander off into Star Wars speak, and I apologize, but
go there.
I love Star Wars, but there's something about it I really don't like. And that is that it seems to me that all the Jedi Knights ever do is reach for their lightsabers. Like, I want them to be manipulative. The real fighting order knights of the Middle Ages, just as an example, like the Hospitallers, they did elaborate crap like modern special forces, deception operations. On a famous occasion, the Knights Hospitaller saved part of the Holy Land by arranging a marriage. That was it. No one died, right? Like, and that, like, if you're supposedly the good guys, you should behave like the good guys. And that means maybe getting people to do things that are in their own self-interest without using violence. I'll use a modern example that will no doubt piss off some listener somewhere and say, like, manipulating people to get vaccinated is not evil. That would be for everyone's benefit. And, like, so I tried to make my Lightbringers the way I would have liked Jedi Knights to work. Yeah, okay. I mean, they have the equivalent of a lightsaber, but they're trying to do a whole bunch of other things at a bunch of different levels before they get there.
It was an interesting moral quandary that you did to kind of dabble in lightly in this, and I appreciated it. Thank you so much for taking the time out. And just so the listeners know, he is also building a canoe as he's doing this interview, and it's beyond impressive.
Yeah, every time I'm looking out there, I'm checking to make sure that nobody is wandering around in my open garage, because the epoxy resin on my nearly 100-year-old canoe is drying. Oh, it might be 100 years old. It's like 1920s.
That's the nicest way of saying he's looking at the clock to seeing how much longer he's got to do this for. Where can people find you, and where can people find the books?
Okay, so christiancameronauthor.com is probably the easiest. Books are pretty available. One of the best things that ever happened to authors is ebooks, because then your stuff never goes away. People can always just go on Amazon and buy it. I would like to, I'm so glad you're doing Cold Iron, because I'm having a bit of a Cold Iron renaissance. I think a lot of people missed it when it came out, and now all of a sudden a bunch of people are reading it, which I deeply appreciate. But I also want to push Artifact Space, and I can't hold up a book because all of mine are gone. Mysteriously, my friends appeared like a horde of locusts and walked off with Artifact Space, but it's just out, and all of that is available like literally any electronic medium. The audiobook, sorry, I'm doing a little plug. The audiobook of Artifact Space is incredible. The woman who read the main character just blew me away. I think she made it twice as good as I ever made it. So I strongly recommend it as an audiobook. I should listen to Cold Iron. I've never heard it. I should hear what the audiobook sounds like. Anyway, Mike, thanks so much for having me, and thanks very much for plugging Cold Iron. I appreciate it.
I'm super excited to have you on. By the way, you're also one of the top authors I've interviewed hairstyle wise. I love it.
Wow, this is my COVID. I haven't cut my hair. I think you're just jealous because I have.
Can't wait to speak to you soon. Thank you so much.
Take care, Mike.
We got Cameron crazy on that one, and I'm not talking about the stupid-ass Duke fans. Duke. But after the Cameron Johnston podcast duology summer extravaganza, this was followed by Christian Cameron. So the streak of Camerons is over, because next week I am beyond excited to be joined by Chase Bowling to talk about his book, The Road of Resistance. After that, I just finished this one up, and let me tell you, it's fun as fuck. The City of Lies by Sam Hawke. And after that, The Coward by Stephen Aaron. Stephen Aaron. Go read the book. It's fantastic. Keep on reading or something, everybody. Peace.